Okay, everybody.
Okay, so Balint will present us now how they updated their Jolie and microservice-based document management system to include electronic invoicing.
Right, yeah, we had the hyperloop of tree manipulation, IoT, and now back to the ground with invoicing, right? So I'm Balint Maschio. I work in Morif, and my work in Morif is basically trying to design microservice architectures that put in communication different software. So we can talk about microSOA. We heard yesterday. We can call them microSOA. So the presentation agenda kind of follows the process that took us from an initial implementation developed in 2015 to the current implementation for this specific workflow. So let me see if we have this as well. Oh, yeah. So as I say, we start from an analysis of the previous MSA. Oops, sorry. And then we're looking how we can produce an XML file, how we can validate, how we handle recovery, and how we handle incoming invoices. No one loves those. And why we have a microservices architecture. So this is the original kind of architectural structure. We can identify 3 layers. You know, the lines here are actually on purpose. We have a connector layers towards SAP and connector layers towards third-party document to accept third-party document and to write on our document management system. Okay, in the middle here we have where we do things, where we manipulate the data, where we collect data from SAP and remap them on more convenient data format. I don't need to, right? So, sorry for going from left to right and right to left, but fundamentally, this is the active cycle. By active cycle, what I mean is all those documents produced by SAP in a PDF format, and then they have to go to the document management system. So there is a bit of a decoupling here. So we simply, in the previous slide, we work with files, and then we have a recovery. This is the old implementation. We had a recovery, they read the files and did all a series of things. So if you can see, we have this RFC client that basically goes and collects data from SAP. That is his job. Is completely bounded to that job. It doesn't do anything else. And then on the end, with this data, it creates a profile for this document in the document management system. Vice versa, for all those documents that come in from external sources, and they came in paper format, we have what is called early recording, late archiving. So you're starting by recording your ERP, and then you move on in a second moment to actually archiving by barcode. So again, so the master of this workflow is SAP, and then we do pretty much the same. So we go and collect the data. They are coherent with the document, and then store them in our document management system. So, okay. So at a certain point, 2017, the Italian government kind of realized, oh, we need to go electronic, right? So the specifications were not that clear, but anyhow. So we could have used the SAP standard module, install it, but unfortunately we couldn't do it because in our installation didn't support that. We're missing some module. So we decided, well, okay, let's make it do it to our microservices. And there were certain specification. We wanted to maintain the operativity of our my coworker as linear as possible, as similar to what they did before. We also needed to recover some data from a not ASAP source, and we wanted to maintain the kind of the structure, the architectural structure we had before, right? So, so we decided to. The color maybe is not that great. We decided to add a new element to our architecture that fundamentally whatever is XML in terms of document will pass through that. So in the future, if we needed to send, I don't know, orders via XML, we will re-implement something here. We expanded this microservice, but it's bounded to the job of working with XML. Okay. Also, colored like this, it shows you what impact had in the overall infrastructure. We heard about it, impact on the microservice architecture. So we had one new microservice and then some changes on two of those. Okay. So one aspect of it was to validate our XML, because fundamentally it was a business requirement. Because if you send an invoice with a wrong XML, you actually have to send two documents. One saying, "Oh no, the previous invoice was wrong," and the second, the correct invoice, right? So we used a bit of a dirty trick, I suppose. This morning, Fabrizio was showing you these things called, service. I call it internal service. So the idea was that we transform the XSD, so the descriptor of the document, into a series of types, Jolie types, and they are used. Here we are, fattura elettronica type. They are used as input message, and then we use the runtime type check to validate the possible error. Plus, we can add here some extra check. They're not connected with the type, but they kind of say, if you wrote this kind of payment method, you need to add the IBAN and all sort of check. I have removed them from. Okay, so in the first version, we had a file-based recovery, right? So this had a kind of a disadvantage, because it's what I call that recovery or nothing. Yeah, so I had to go through the entire workflow, or I couldn't have steps. So with our technical partner, that is Italiana Software, we have introduced a new element. Let me go back. This document workflow manager that allows us to define in this way like a state machine. So you can define not a full workflow, but the document in which state is. So, and for each state you can implement a series of operation. Okay, so so what about those nasty things that come and you have to pay? Yeah. So, well, now I told you about early registering, late archiving. Flipping the coin is early archiving, late registering. In an ideal world, you would do this automatically. Your XML arrives, it contains all the information that you need to do the registering, and you don't do anything else. In reality, due to the flexibility of the XS of the document, we're having to pass through a step. It's a parking step. So basically, we create like a temporary version of the invoice in SAP, and and then it gets processed and it kind of re-enter in the flow of the late archiving. So we also needed to, in this phase, to collaborate with with another ERP, and certain invoice had to go that way. So here we are, how we did it. We have a third-party ERP. We have this passive XML where there is actually the workflow, how things get done. Once again, you can see the connection with the document workflow manager. Yeah, basically when this things here collects the incoming XML, then this is the owner of the process. It gives it to the document workflow manager and says, call me several times to do several things. And you can see this call me several times, several things in this. So here we are. We have the document manager system that calls the front end. For then it kind of goes here. Then he says, okay, let's start processing. And then the document management workflow manager calls the passive XML several times. You can see status 1, I call this operation status, and all the status and all the operation correlated to that specific status. Okay, so putting things together. Well, personally, I think that having a microservice architecture helped us to develop this, because we can really modularize the kind of what a microservices has to do and what kind of things. So we needed microservices that processed the XML, and we just built it. It had also an impact on kind of team working, because I kind of have 3 people working on microservices, and we manage about 50 microservices at the moment, and I feel that we have built a flexible system. We haven't lost flexibility, and so if we need to either update the kind of document or add similar workflow, as I said, similar XML workflow, we can do easily. One of the many people have said it. One of the problem is that sometime in dividing your problem in microservices, so you might add extra complexity, because you tend to, I don't know, let's split and split and split, and so and this is a problem. And then deciding the boundary of the microservices is not always easy, and this is I don't know, maybe a silly comment, but it would be nice to have like a normalization process and strategy to solve these 2 problems above. Any question?
So are there any questions in the audience? Yeah, okay.
So thanks for your presentation. I'm just curious, how do you deploy the microservices? Are they on some kind of AWS cluster thing, or do you have your own hardware?
It's on a single machine, but there is like a product from Italiana Software that allows the deployment. But as Claudio will show you in his presentation, as well, if the infrastructure kind of collapses, the microservices remain active, and it's more like a monitoring the deployment. They're deployed as services, as operative system services. Is a okay. Any other questions?
Did that answer the question? So maybe a short question. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How is the compatibility to SAP when they change something on the interfaces? Or
Yeah, that is a good question. Well, basically, the answer is here. That we use remote function calls. So we either develop, the Z function, the Z functions, or we use the standard BAPI. And the nice things about this is that we have a tool. So if we change something here, we just regenerated the full code that talks to it. And so this really takes 2 minutes for me to change something. And from here onward, anywhere is seen as a Jolie service, as we've seen with the interface and all the rest.
Okay, so thanks again to Balint.